Weapon banners and wuthering waves are so overpowered that they even beat out the value of limited character banners inside of the game. Let's talk about the multitude of reasons why. First, let's go over the math. Shout out to Pridwin for giving us calculations on the damage differentials between weapons over here. So we're just going to be using their math. The first thing we'll notice, weapons such as Emerald Genesis, aka the standard banner 5-star sword, are significantly better than their 4-star counterparts, offering a 20% damage increase over the best 4-star weapon in the game. This is largely because many of the 4-star weapons we currently have available to us do not have crit rate available on them, whereas as we can see here, Emerald Genesis and the 5-star gun over here as well as Static Mystic do. Now this crit rate ends up giving us even more benefit that we'll talk about in a bit, but a 20% damage difference on the standard banner weapon is absolutely ridiculous. For reference, even signature light cones inside of Honkai Star Rail, for example, only offer at most a 17% increase on one of the strongest characters in the game for it, Jing Liu. Getting 20% damage increase just from a standard banner weapon is frankly unethical. Having mentioned Shisha, if we look at her weapon as well, it paints the same picture, and so does Rover with his 5-star weapon over here. Every single one of these is offering about a 20 to 25% damage increase from their best 4-star weapon, and that's only on the standard banner 5-star weapon. The flat stats and crit rate you get from this is absolutely ridiculous, and we'll talk about in a bit why this is even more egregious than you realize. If we actually look over at 4-star weapons, the top rated weapon for Encore for 4 stars is actually pretty comparable to the 5-star weapon. As you can see, only an 11.5% damage differential. Now, once you factor in the fact that Stringmaster, a limited weapon from Inlin's banner, gives you an absolutely ridiculous damage increase from even this one with crit rate on it, I think you're starting to see why weapons are so insanely broken in this game. We've talked about the weapon math and the difference between 4 stars and 5 stars. Now let's do a deeper dive and look at the constellations versus the weapon value. Spoiler alert, weapons outpace it by far. Let's use Chisha as an example. Not a character many people use, but we'll use her as starters as we were just on her. If we look at Chisha, even going all the way up to S6, you are not outpacing the damage increase that you get from getting even a rank 1 5-star weapon on the standard banner. This is ridiculous. Do you know how hard it is to get S6 of a 4-star character unless you're going absolutely crazy on a rate up banner and you get lucky? But it's not just 4 stars looking like this either. Let's go to the 5 stars. GN, it is not until you get over to S3 that it outpaces the standard banner weapon, not even his limited signature weapon. 4 total copies of GN before he actually outpaces a singular copy of a weapon. That is ridiculous. But GN's not the only example of this either. Let's go to Inlin. Inlin, same picture. You have to get to S2 before she outpaces getting a weapon. And now keep in mind, getting the copies of these characters are always going to be 50-50s, which is something we'll talk about in a bit as well. Calcharo, once again, similar picture right here. S3 before you even get comparable. And this is with the 5-star limited broadsword not even having crit rate on it. It only has attack, whereas the best 4-star broadsword for Calcharo has crit rate on it. So this is the best case scenario. And he still has to get all the way to S3 before it's even remotely comparable. Encore, same exact picture. You have to go to S4 before it becomes comparable to 1 copy of a weapon. What do you really think is going to be easier for you to get? 4 copies of Encore or 1 copy of a standard banner weapon? Sanhua, same example. You have to go all the way to S3 for it to be even comparable to a weapon. It doesn't even beat it out in this instance. You have to go all the way to S4 for that. Now, Mortify and Denjin are a little bit more egregious in this example, so they're actually characters that may benefit a little bit from getting their constellations, or sequences as they're called in this game, up higher. But that's only true for, in Mortify's case, on the later ones, which he does get a lot of value. He goes up to 167, his constellations. I am so Genshin-brained right now. His sequences are actually very valuable. Denjin, very similar situation, where you only have to go up to S2 for it to be very valuable, and that's probably easier than getting a 5-star weapon, but keep in mind, only Danjin benefits from this, whereas if you have the weapon, everyone who can use the weapon benefits from that. One of the biggest endgame constants inside of Wuthering Waves is this right here, the Tower of Adversity. Now, if you didn't know, not only can you share gear between different characters and different towers inside of here, obviously every single one of you should know that you can only use 3 characters per tower inside of here. What you may not know is you can actually transfer gear between the characters in every single one of these towers. That means if you use someone on the Resonance Tower on the left over here, in our case, we'll say we ended up using Havoc MC. Well, then when I go over here and I go into the Echoing Tower, aka the rightmost tower, now while I have Yang Gang on the right tower, That means that I can actually take gear off of Havoc MC and throw it onto Yang Yang. Now, obviously, they're part of different elements, so I don't really ideally transfer echoes between them, but I can still do that, and that is a legitimate strategy, especially if you're in the early game and don't have too many leveled echoes. Where this starts to get really abusable though, weapons. If you have characters such as Yang Yang and Havoc Rover that end up sharing weapons, now you have the ability to pull for something that can affect the outcome of multiple towers, unlike characters which only affect the outcome of one tower. This is why I am saying that character banners are worse off than weapon banners are, especially given how much of a damage increase you get from every single one of these weapons. If you have a main DPS such as Dan Jin on one side, for example, and you have another main DPS such as Rover on the other side, if you have the Emerald of Genesis, both of these characters are getting a 20% damage increase on each side of tower, and this is going to get more egregious as more characters can start using these weapons too. Currently, we don't have too many characters that can actually abuse this. There's maybe Encore and Yinlin that can do it, but if we look at the other people who use rectifiers, for example, Baiji and Verena aren't really going to make use of that. But if you look at short sword users, we mentioned Dan Jin and Rover, Spectral Rover can end up using it as well. But as we start getting more characters, then we're going to be able to abuse this even more, which is why the value of the weapon banners is going to increase exponentially. Let's talk about reason number 3 why the weapon banner is so overpowered in Wuthering Waves. That is the pity system. When looking at character banners, you only have a 50% chance of actually obtaining the character on the banner. With the second one, if you fail that 50-50, ended up being a guarantee of that character. Now, if you look at the weapon banner over here, as you will notice, once you hit 80 convenes, the 5-star weapon of your choice is guaranteed. Now, obviously for a featured weapon banner, it's only going to be that weapon, but that also means that for the standard banner, when you end up pulling, you can get that weapon as well. That means you can guarantee the overpowered weapons, aka the short sword and the pistol, such as Emerald of Genesis and Static Mist, I think it's called, just by hitting 80 pulls. There is no gambling for a 50-50 on whether or not you're going to get a useful character or not. Instead, you're guaranteed to get it within 80 pulls, a much more valuable use of your resources on a stronger material for your account. But it gets even more egregious than that. Reason number 4 is the safe investment for the future. These weapons are going to be usable on characters in the future, especially if you end up pulling on ones such as String Master over here that have crit rate on them. Every single DPS released in this game right now wants crit rate, and something tells me that's not a trend that they're going to buck anytime soon. If you have a crit rate weapon, it is going to scale so well into the future. You now have a safer return on your account rather than having a character that has the potential of getting power crept. As mentioned before, you can use it on multiple sides of tower, but not only that, you can actually use this on future limited characters that end up coming out as well that you may like more. The weapon banner just gains so much value in this game, it's disgusting. One last thing I want to talk about, especially with crit rate weapons, is how much easier it makes your farming. Now, we're not talking about damage here, we're actually talking about echo substats. If you end up having a crit rate weapon, you can actually go over here and start rolling on the crit damage echoes as well. Normally, you wouldn't be able to do this unless you're running a 4-4-1-1-1 setup, but with the crit rate weapons, you now have twice as many 4-star echoes that you can actually roll on, making your time farming, especially as a casual player, that much more easy. This means by having a crit rate 5-star weapon, the game now respects your time more because you get more out of farming than you would normally. I can't use these crit damage echoes at all. I don't have the crit rate to justify it. If I throw this thing on, I'm going to have like 10% crit rate. You may be wondering how you should go about going for these weapons then. Maybe you really want the characters and that's the reason why you play games. That's the reason why I play these too. One of the biggest things I would recommend is once you have the character that you really want from the standard banner over here, or maybe whatever characters you really want from this banner. Let's say maybe you really want Encore and Kalcharo. Once you have both of them, start pulling on the weapon banners with your standard pulls. Now, once you end up getting the short sword and the pistol, heck, even when you start getting these weapons over here that aren't as strong in the rectifier, the gauntlets, and the broadsword, you're going to make your time inside of Tower of Adversity so much easier. You're going to make your time inside of all of the open world content so much easier. Building your account is going to be so much easier. You're going to have a better time playing a lot of these mid-tier characters because you have a better weapon so they actually do damage. What I'm saying is, as someone who has never pulled on a weapon banner in Genshin or HSR on my main accounts, I would recommend that you go for a weapon banner on this, at least the standard weapon banner, if you can use the sword or the gun. If you have the extra resources, and especially if you're spending a little bit of money, I would highly recommend starting to pull on the limited weapon banner. As a side note, it's slightly ironic for me to talk about pulling when, as you can tell by the pulls, I don't even pull on this account because we're using this account for a no pulls challenge, which you can watch live either here or on Twitch at /Rhinne. Save time and effort by checking out my echo efficiency guide right here. It'll tell you exactly how you should farm echoes in the most efficient manner possible to get the most out of your time. Subscribe for more Wuthering Waves content, and I'll see you in the future.